All right, how's everybody doing today? If you're tuning in, it'd be great to know where you're from. So yeah, just like drop a little note in the chat box, make sure we can see everything. I can see you guys well there. Just drop a note, say where you're from. Yeah, hey folks, how's it going? So my name is Steve Theberge. I'm a ceramicist in Western Massachusetts. I live in Northampton, Mass. And my studio is this beautiful old brick building. It's an old factory. And it's actually, a little known fact, it's where 70% of the world's toothbrushes were produced up until like 1975 or so. So long history of making things, making useful things, making functional things. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my work, and then I'm going to demo, hopefully not embarrass myself too much publicly, and then yeah, answer any questions people have. If you do have questions, just pop them in the chat, and I'm happy to get to them. And yeah, excited to get going. So as I mentioned, I'm a ceramicist, I'm a potter, and my training is not academic at all. So I came up in a studio apprenticeship model. So when I was 17, I dropped out of high school and went out to the hills of Western Mass and trained under a potter named Mark Shapiro. And I spent 2 years there working with him, learning his materials and glazes and firing techniques, and then took a very long, circuitous route back to working in clay again. So there was about a 12-year gap in between the end of my apprenticeship and when I came back and started making pots again full-time. And that was in around 2013. I want to talk a little bit about my surfaces, and then I'm going to jump into the demo. So if you've had a chance to see, that's got tea in it, I want to pick that up. If you've had a chance to look at any of my work online, and hopefully you can see this all right. So I make stoneware vessels. They're all functional. They're all intended for daily use, and kind of like a display or serving or eating, ideally to become part of your daily life. So it's a stoneware clay. It's fired to what's called cone 10, which is about 2,300 degrees in a propane-powered kiln. So it's kind of like a huge furnace, and each piece gets loaded in individually. And I'm working with a very, very kind of simple and straightforward collection of materials and glazes. And my inspiration there is really to think about how can I strip away? How can I pull away layers here? How can I get to kind of the essence and kind of the true kind of nature of each piece? I think a lot of people, when they become artists or craftspeople, there's a long process of addition where you're adding things on and trying to make it more complicated, make things more, just add a lot of extra noise. And in the past couple of years, I've kind of come around to how do I turn the volume down and just let the thing speak for itself? So I'm working with one clay body, a very simple Celadon liner glaze, and then kind of two different surfaces. So the dark surface here has a very iron-rich clay. It's dipped in an iron-rich clay, and then has a glaze made out of wood ash, like just the burned-up ashes of wood from the fireplace. And then these lighter pots have what's called a slip, which is a white slip, a watered-down white clay. And I add, hopefully you can see this, I have this big bin here of rocks and dirt and grit and all kinds of fun stuff. And I add that into the surface. So each piece is unique and has a really kind of distinct quality to it. And so those are really the two surfaces that I work with. And for me, it's the challenge is how can I take those as far as they can possibly go? How can I really make this as rich and as full an experience for me as the artist and for you as the user? So that said, I'm going to start by making a few pots. I throw on an electric wheel. Hey folks, thanks for joining in. Great to see y'all. I'm going to start by warming up. I'm just going to make a couple of these little bowls. These are on the site. They're called small bowls. It's a very creative title. And these I make as kind of I use them for salt next to my stove. They're really nice for olive oil. They're really nice for rings. They're lovely for incense, whiskey, wine, whatever it is you like to put in them. And they're also a really, for me, a really great way to warm up. Each one is individual. Each one is just one thought. So if there's any there's any potters in the house, this is a technique called throwing off the hump. So this big lump of clay is the hump. And what I'm doing now is I'm centering. And this is like a really traditional technique. You'll see this technique of throwing off the hump all around the world. And what it allows you to do is make a lot of pieces simply off of one particular, off of one big lump of clay. Thanks, Ashley. That's great to hear. All right, so this is an electric wheel. There's lots of other kinds of wheels. I actually trained on a wheel called a treadle wheel, which is foot-powered. But when I switched to standing up, which I did primarily for back and shoulder health, the electric wheel made a lot of sense. So the thing I love about throwing off the hump, especially these little bowls with like very, very, very soft clay throwing off the hump, is that it's such an intuitive, organic experience. Each piece is kind of one thought, and the margin of error is both like massive and tiny at the same time. Every act and every action counts, but also each piece can kind of be its own thing. And there's not kind of the tightness of trying to make 20 exact the same mug or the same bowl. They can just kind of be a kind of loose expression of where my mind's at that moment. Hey, Brad. So I do a bunch of stuff. I'd say it's probably like 70% wheel thrown, 75% wheel thrown, and then I do a fair amount of slab building as well. So actually, I could just distract myself for a moment and grab a piece. So these like large trays, these are made out of a really big slab of clay that I drape over a mold. It's like an MDF particle board mold. So those are made out of just like a big slab of clay that I roll out on that roller there. It's called the slab roller, conveniently enough. And then I do some other, like when I'm making a really large jar, I do a coil and paddle method, where I throw a big bowl and then I'll add a coil, and I'll paddle that with a wooden paddle and anvil, and I'll throw it again. And that's kind of like a mix of throwing and hand building. I've lost my sponge conveniently. There we go. I probably spend like at least half my time looking for my sponge in the studio. Throwing and hand building, they each kind of provide an opportunity for a different kind of expression. So the thing that I love about throwing on the wheel is the softness and the looseness and the roundness and the ability to kind of produce a lot of work really quickly. And the thing that's kind of wonderful about hand building is that you can get a certain kind of precision and crispness. It's just not possible. So when the piece is finished, and these little bowls, they're quick. I just run this piece of wire underneath, and then off it goes. And there it is. I'll make a couple more of these just to... Yeah, Brad, it's the thing about throwing, it's like the learning curve is so steep, so it takes forever to get any kind of basic technical facility, and I think to my mind, it takes 10 years before you're really able to I think articulate a pretty unique and personal and individual form of expression, just because the technical learning curve is so high. And to be able to develop a certain kind of facility and comfort with the material, it just takes time. It takes a lot of failure and a lot of heartbreak. What I found is that, with these mediums, there's certain personalities that are really, drawn to different mediums. And there's something about, the experience of loss and the experience of kind of the next thing can be the best thing. That a lot of potters are kind of very engaged with this question of loss. Yeah, centering, it really is actually, to use an unfortunate metaphor, it's kind of like riding a bike. it doesn't make sense until it does. It's like the most like bizarre, counterintuitive experience, and then all of a sudden there you are, and you're flying down the road. It's the same with centering. You know, you kind of have to tap into this non-literal, non-mechanical, intuitive body sense and understand kind of when the clay is actually fully in alignment. And for those who don't know what centering is, it's what I'm doing right now. And basically what I'm doing is I'm bringing, theoretically this wheel is spinning in a perfect circle, and I'm bringing the clay and the wheel and my body into alignment. Thanks, Ashley. You know, I do actually teach sometimes. I teach workshops, like weekend or week-long workshops at craft schools, which I really enjoy. All right, got distracted here. So I'm going to make one of those cups, those handleless cups. So Patricia, I mean, you know, people ask me this question often, and it's, you know, it changes. I actually really like, making these cups I'm about to make. I like using them, I like making them. They're very connected to sort of the history of global ceramics. And again, they offer me an opportunity to kind of, each piece can be its own. So Aaron, yeah, it's just different. You kind of just have to learn how to use your body differently. You know, one thing I've noticed is that I'm a little more tired at the end of the day when I'm standing, but the trade-off is that my back, it doesn't hurt. And I've actually found that like if I'm throwing a big piece, I can really kind of like anchor myself down on the wheel and get a lot of leverage. It also allows me to like do this and stand around and move around and take a look from a distance, and that's really helpful for me. So this is a cup, you know, it's certainly East Asian in origin. I'm making kind of a Japanese derivation of it, which in Japan is called the Yunomi, and it's kind of like an everyday teacup. So it's the kind of cup you'd use maybe for like green tea in the morning, not for matcha. It's definitely not for matcha, but you know, you could use it for sencha. I drink coffee out of these sometimes. They've kind of made their way to the States, certainly in craft circles. Something in my water bucket again. So one of the fun things about working with clay is that your tools can be anything you want. You know, this is like a purpose-built specific pottery tool. This is a cut-up hotel key card, and they both serve their own purpose. So Patricia, that's a great question. I'm really interested in scaling my work up. So I'm interested, and I'll talk about them in just a second. We'll switch over to the table. You know, I'm really interested in working, you know, using the vessel as a jumping off point, but starting to think about how, you know, vessels can sort of transition into a more physical experience for the person who's interacting with it. So less about storing something and more about like making a vessel that's this big, right? And what does that do to change a space? What does that do to change your interaction with an object? You know, I don't know if the meaning of it necessarily changes, but I'm really interested in that kind of experiential quality, as well as the scale. I think the scale to me creatively is, you know, it's a whole different set of problems open up creatively. When you're talking about balance and proportion and line, and material questions open up. So, you know, that's the direction that I hope to head. We'll see where that goes. So, kind of the inside formed. Now I'm going to slow my wheel down a little bit. And you can see I'm using this rib, and I'm just kind of like smoothing the outside, I'm smoothing the clay wall, evening things out. And I'm going to decorate this the way that I decorate those white vases. That if you scroll down, you can probably see them below you. I went with a wildly original name of vase for those, so they should be pretty hard to find. So I'm just going to open up a little bit of space here. And I'm going to take a little bit of clay off here. Right, so I've got kind of a good amount of like wet clay. Oh, thanks, Brad. Yeah, that's one's actually is in the show. I'll pull those down in a second when I finish this cup. So like I said, I've got like these 3 different old jars I made years ago filled with different materials. So this one has just silica sand. It's just kind of like beach sand. This one has some playground sand. And then this one has this kind of collection of rocks and stones and some seeds and all kinds of just kind of wild stuff down from North Carolina. A friend of mine in North Carolina sent this up. He's a clay manufacturer down there. So what I do is the surface is kind of wet. And then I kind of get this like grit on my hands. And with no particular intention, just thinking about creating a pattern that is on the whole surface of the piece, I'll get that grit on there. And then maybe I'll just kind of like add a little extra to it. And so this surface to me is, one of the things I'm interested in exploring in my work is sort of the passage of time and understanding how to express or articulate or engage with this question of the passage of time. Especially living in New England, working in an old factory building, surrounded by these old mountains and these old buildings and this sense of decay and rebirth and decay and rebirth and decay and rebirth. Something about this particular surface kind of illustrates that it's a geologic sense of movement, it's an organic sense of movement, which to me continues to be pretty interesting. So, if I wanted to, I could like add some interesting little like, like little texture and surface here. Great. And then just put it off the wheel like that, and off it goes. So you can see, again, I can't see myself in this platform, so hopefully you can see this. That surface is on there, and if you look at some of the vases, this is that's what it would look like at the end. I told a couple friends I'd be doing this, and I'm getting some very smart-ass text messages right now. I see you guys. All right, so I'll make 1 or 2 more pots. What do people want to see? Hey, Neri, how's it going? So I mostly teach throughout New England. So I teach usually every year, once or twice, at a place called Snow Farm, which is a program. It's a school in Williamsburg, Mass, just about 20 minutes away. I've taught at a private studio, Allison Palmer's studio down in Connecticut, which is a really lovely space. And I've been a teaching assistant up at a school called Haystack in Maine, which, for those of you interested in exploring craft and exploring handmade objects, is perhaps, for me, the most creatively influential place I've ever been. And I would really recommend, maybe you're taking a pottery class right now, when the world opens up again, think about doing one of these 2-week intensive classes at Haystack or Penland or Aramont. There's places all over the country. But for me, that kind of like 2 weeks on the edge of the world, next to the ocean, with nothing to do but kind of lose yourself in the work, your sense of creative development will expand in ways you never imagined in those 2 weeks. And it's been an incubator for generations of craftspeople. So my plug is Haystack, but it's everyone's got their preference. All right. So maybe what I'll do, we got just 10 minutes left here. I'll make something slightly bigger. So Madeline, I work full-time in the studio. So I'm just going to tilt my screen down and let me know if you can maybe see the wheel a little bit better. So I'm full-time in the studio. I do also have a very part-time job doing administration for a nonprofit, but full-time. So this is like usually a recipe for disaster to try and like make a more complicated piece in a public forum. So, you know, we'll just see what happens. So I'm going to make one of those split rim bowls, just a kind of a smaller one. So what I'm doing now, the clay is centered, and this is like, ooh, this is some beautiful, super soft clay. So it's really moving well. Super soft clay can be a little bit of a liability when you're working on a larger piece because it's soft and floppy. Just imagine like if you're working with like a really wet pastry dough or bread dough, you just have a little bit less control. Thanks, Bill. Oh yeah, so at this point I always know what I'm going to make. I have like a hit list from orders or getting ready for a show, and I'm going to, you know, I will weigh out the clay, so I'll weigh out specific amounts of clay for each piece so I know what I need to make for that day. Often my work day is a combination of making new pieces and then finishing the ones I made yesterday. So, you know, for example, these pieces would have to dry, and then tomorrow I can trim them, and then I can decorate them, and then they get fired a couple times. So, you know, one of the interesting things about clay as a medium is it kind of, I shouldn't say have to. It's helpful if you know what you want to make in advance, because it really allows you the opportunity to be a little more focused and also have the material you need. All right, I'm going to like skip many of the processes of refinement in this bowl and just kind of get to the good stuff. This is kind of a smaller version of those split rim bowls. What I do is I get the wheel going kind of slow, and then I've got this needle tool here. And people always ask me at shows, like, so is that 2 bowls inside of one? And it's not, it's just that I threw the rim a little extra thick. And I'll kind of like smooth this out a little bit. And then I can sort of choose how many lobes or how many sides I want it to have. I'm going to do 5. So I'll pinch this together here. 2, 3, 4, 5. And so that kind of like it alters the round a little bit, changes the shape a little bit, and then I'll just come back in. There's a few different tools I use to do this. And how do I use this one? This one. And then I just kind of gently rock it up like that. And this is kind of an interesting way just to like experiment with setting off the round ever so slightly. Well, Brad, I skipped a lot of steps. This is like those Martha Stewart moments. Cool, okay. I'm gonna just dry my hands off real quick and then have a little sip of tea here and turn around the computer. All right, so hopefully you can maybe see a little bit more of the space now. It's this beautiful old brick factory building. All right, how's the view? Can you guys see me? Cool, I want to talk a little bit about, this is why my aprons are always dirty. I want to talk a little bit about some various pieces that I have on the table here. These are all in the show, so if you want to see them in more detail, you can scroll down. So these are those vases I mentioned. And these kind of started off as like, I just made a couple a few years ago, and they were really popular at a show, and I kind of kept on making them, and they've evolved over time. And this is a form you might see other artists making as well, this kind of like ovalized, off the round shape. So these are thrown on the wheel like that, and then I cut the bottom out. Imagine I threw it round like this, and then I would cut out the bottom, and I just like squish it in half and plop it on a slab of clay. And that's a very simple way to go from round to whatever you like. So these are all, I make them in kind of a series of sizes and shapes. And with each one, you have the opportunity to tell a certain story and a certain narrative. And especially when they're grouped together, if you get maybe 2 or 3 of them together at different heights or different sizes, you're able to sort of maybe start to tell a story about, like a geologic moment or about a snowstorm or a particular mood, especially depending on the flowers that you're using. So these are fun pots to make. I really enjoy making these larger vessels as well. This kind of storage jar shape you'll find in pretty much all around the world. Clay is one of the oldest, if not the oldest, shared universal material to work with. And the need to store water or apples or seeds or whatever it is pretty ancient. Ferment beverages or ferment foods. I started making these, sort of studying and looking at Korean moon jars, which are actually quite a different shape than this. So my interpretation of it has changed over the years. Certainly in terms of my training, my background is very much rooted in New England pots, early American Southern pots, French and British ceramics, and medieval French and British ceramics. So this is sort of like an evolution of them. This is one of the pieces I was talking about before. Somebody asked about like what's next, and I can imagine scaling this up so that it's the size that I am, and really trying to think about what does that object then become in the world that we live in now. So these are maybe one of my favorite pieces to make. They're dead simple and they're incredibly challenging. Like the mechanics, the technique, not so complicated. But this is but to make them well, to make them balanced is a real challenge. So so Amy, I started about 25 years ago. I started making pots when I was 15. And again, there's that big gap there, but your eye is developing even if your hands are not, right? So I don't think that time is wasted necessarily. But if you can pick one thing and kind of devote your life to it and see how far it can take you and how far you can take it, there's real joy in that for me. Actually, yeah, Bill Daly is incredible. He's incredible. Amazing. Just a little bit, almost out of time. So if you do have any other last minute questions, this is a really good example. This platter, which is, if you scroll down, you'll see, this is a sort of medium-sized platter. This is a great example of what happens in the kiln. So I haven't really talked about the firing process, but essentially I fire the kiln up to temperature in a low oxygen environment. And then most people, what they do is they will turn the kiln off, be reasonable, go home, go to bed. What I do is that I keep the kiln on as it cools down to about 1600 degrees. And what that does is that it really changes the nature of the iron in the clay and iron in the glaze. And you get this like intense metallic purple, blue, black surface. That's the iron and that's the wood ash in collaboration with each other. But this is a great example of it. You can see the drips. You can see some of the metallic stuff. You can see some of this deep red, purple, kind of brick color. And it really, to me, is a good example of what the firing process looks like when it works. And I did want to talk a little bit about, I kind of stopped making this surface for a while, but I'm thinking about getting back into it. This is done with a rope. So it's just a little piece of rope pressed into the surface of the piece and then rolled down the surface and rolled down the surface. This is a decorative technique that, again, you'll see all over the world. People making simple vessels with the tools and the decorative equipment that they have just around them. So this is something my teacher does a lot on his work, and I really, it's something that I've done off and on for years. And lastly, just wanted to talk about these larger hexagon plates. These actually came out of a conversation with Brad last year. Thanks, Brad. Where I made them in a much smaller version, and he said, "Well, can you make them bigger?" And I said, "Okay, let me try." And I'm so grateful for that suggestion because they've really become one of my favorite pieces at this scale. I think they're, as a dinner plate, they're cool, as a tray, they become a much different kind of experiential object, and they take on a really different role in our lives. So it looks like maybe I'm out of time. Is that correct, Chad? Chad, we're coming right to the end here. So I think my time here is up, and I want to really thank you all for joining me today. Again, my name is Steve Theberge. You can scroll down to see some of the work. Thanks to the whole crew at Field and Supply and at Fair. It's an incredible experience being part of the show, and I really, really appreciate all the work that goes into doing the online show. So thanks again, and I hope to see you guys in person later on. Take care.